Hello everyone, I hope you're having a wonderful day. After a night of heavy rain, water rose dangerously close to the stove. Most of the firewood was soaked, and just a few more centimeters could have collapsed the kitchen base, all while debt pressure and job uncertainty surrounded Toan. In the middle of a blackout and financial strain, they had to choose between staying steady or letting everything fall apart. Now, let's explore the story of Toan and Tu Diem. Can they overcome these mounting risks and protect the small home they are trying to rebuild? If you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next videos. Rain poured over the small farmyard through the night. By morning, water had not only pooled in the yard, but crept close to the doorstep. Toan stepped outside and immediately saw that one corner of the plastic sheet covering the firewood had been torn loose by strong wind. Nearly half of the woodpile was soaked. If it stayed wet another day, mold could set in and they would lose it completely. Tu Diem held a bundle of damp logs and said the storm had been heavy and loud, but they had slept through it. Water had also slipped into a crack in the concrete and run toward the stove area. If the level had risen just a few more centimeters, the clay stove base might have weakened and collapsed. Toan did not waste time. He pulled the sheet back into place and secured it tightly with wire. He told Tu Diem to move the remaining dry wood into the front shelter. They worked quickly because light rain was still falling. As she lifted a large log, her foot slid on the slick surface. Toan caught her before she fell into the water. A hard fall could have injured her back and stopped her from working for days. The incident lasted only seconds, but it left both of them silent. Toan looked at the low section of the yard and said clearly that it had to be fixed today. Waiting was no longer an option. He checked the slope carefully. The ground dipped about 2 to 3 centimeters compared to the gate level, enough to prevent proper drainage. He explained that if they did not correct it, every heavy rain would repeat this problem. In rural areas, 3 continuous days of rain can soften soil, increase slipping risk, and make daily movement difficult. They raised the woodpile another 20 centimeters and placed bricks underneath to allow airflow. This simple adjustment could shorten drying time by 1 to 2 days compared to leaving the wood directly on the ground. When the rain stopped, weak sunlight broke through the clouds. They sat down for a brief rest. Some flower petals had been torn by the storm, but others looked brighter in the fresh light. Tu Diem said the garden still looked beautiful. Toan reminded her that the cold air could easily cause illness. Even a mild flu lasting 5 to 7 days would completely disrupt their work. She hesitated because the tomatoes were at peak harvest. If left too long, overripe fruit would soften and lose market value. Still, she agreed to stay home that morning. They moved to the potted azalea. Its lower leaves were yellowing because the roots had been confined too long. If left in the pot, the plant could die within weeks. Tu Diem suggested planting it in open soil. Toan dug a hole about 30 centimeters deep and 40 centimeters wide to give the roots proper space. When they removed the plant from the pot, the roots were tightly coiled. Toan gently loosened them by hand. This step is important. Without separating compacted roots, the plant may struggle even after being replanted. They placed it in the ground, filled the soil firmly, and Tu Diem watered evenly around the base. In the afternoon, they mixed cement. Toan followed a ratio of 3 parts sand to 1 part cement, adding gravel and slowly pouring water to prevent the mixture from becoming too thin. If the mix is overly wet, surface cracks can appear within months. While he was stirring, his phone rang. Ly asked to meet urgently about a possible construction project. Toan looked at the unfinished walkway. If he stopped midway, the cement might dry unevenly and weaken the surface. Tu Diem told him to go and said she could continue. But leveling and compacting require strength and steady pressure. It would be difficult alone. Toan decided to finish the section quickly before leaving. He worked faster, sweat running into his eyes. Once more, Tu Diem slipped slightly on the damp ground, but regained balance on her own. They completed the surface just before it began to set. Toan told her she mattered more than anything and that he did not want her carrying heavy work alone. She replied calmly that she had been used to enduring hardship since childhood. Her answer stayed with him. Being used to hardship does not mean someone should keep carrying it without support. On the way to the cafe, Toan received another call from an unknown number reminding him about an old company-related debt. The voice demanded early payment. Financial pressure had not disappeared with the loss of his business. He arrived to meet Hai feeling heavier than expected. Sitting across from him, Toan explained that he had lost his assets after refusing to move abroad and choosing to stay with Tu Diem. The company had been reclaimed. The house and cars were no longer his. They were now living temporarily on borrowed farmland. Hai listened and said he could connect Toan with a construction supervision team that needed experienced oversight. The job would not be permanent, but payment could be weekly. At average rates, steady work might cover basic living expenses. It was not a complete solution, but it was a practical starting point. On his way back, the sky darkened earlier than expected. Strong wind swept dust across the dirt road. Toan stopped at a grilled pork stall and bought 2 takeaway portions. When he arrived home, he noticed the plastic cover over the wood had loosened again in the afternoon wind. If left unsecured, another storm could undo their work. He fixed it carefully before going inside to start the stove. Damp wood produced thick smoke. His eyes burned and he coughed repeatedly while blowing on the fire. He heated water so Tu Diem could bathe warmly. Night fell and she had not returned yet. Her phone battery had died earlier, so he could not reach her. Toan stood at the gate looking down the dark dirt path. If rain returned, the road would become slippery and dangerous while carrying a heavy basket. When he finally heard footsteps and the sound of a basket brushing against the gate, he released a deep breath. She walked in carrying a full load of tomatoes. A few had bruised from strong wind in the field, but most remained intact. He stepped forward to take the basket and told her the fire was ready and hot water was prepared. In that moment, the weight of debt calls and uncertain work faded into the background. They went inside and arranged a simple dinner so she would not have to stand over the stove any longer. Small actions, done consistently, created stability even when larger parts of life remained uncertain. Night settled completely over the farm. Darkness covered the yard, with only a yellow bulb hanging from the porch, casting light onto the mat spread outside. Toan and Tu Diem sat facing each other. The grilled pork still released gentle steam. The smell of meat, charcoal, and dipping sauce warmed the air after a long day. Toan handed her a roll he had wrapped carefully, placing just enough herbs and meat inside so it would not fall apart. She ate slowly. A full day of labor had drained her energy. They did not speak loudly. Between short sentences, they observed each other. Toan noticed her hand tremble slightly while holding the chopsticks. It could be from the cold or from exhaustion. He stood up, brought her a light jacket, and placed it over her shoulders. Small actions like this cost nothing but reduce the risk of getting sick at night. In rural areas, even a short illness can mean losing a week of income. The wind grew stronger than expected. The plastic sheet covering the firewood flapped sharply. Toan stood and checked it again. One corner rope had loosened. If the wind intensified, The entire pile could be soaked once more. He tightened the rope firmly and placed a heavy brick along the edge. The task took only minutes, but prevented significant loss if rain returned unexpectedly. When he came back, Tu Diem explained that earlier in the field, strong wind had nearly knocked down one of the tomato trellises. She had to lift it and secure it again. If it had collapsed completely, at least 1/3 of the crop might have been damaged. Toan calculated quickly. With their current planting area, losing 1/3 would reduce income by about 30%. He said he would go early the next morning to reinforce every row with stronger bamboo stakes. Addressing weaknesses immediately reduces long-term risk. They continued eating. The plate slowly emptied. To lighten the mood, Toan suggested playing rock, paper, scissors to decide who would bathe first. He lost. She laughed softly, her cheeks slightly flushed under the yellow light. For a moment, the pressure from debt and the afternoon conversation faded. Then the light flickered and suddenly went out. The yard dropped into complete darkness. Power outages in the area were common after heavy rain. If electricity remained off overnight, the electric water pump would not function. Toan immediately took a small flashlight from the cabinet. He checked the breaker. The entire area was dark, so it was not only their house. He quickly filled several buckets with stored water before the system stopped completely. Acting fast ensured they would have enough water in the morning if power did not return. Under the flashlight beam, Tu Diem's face showed clear fatigue. She said she still planned to go to the market early the next day because tomato prices might drop if delayed. Toan reminded her that health mattered more than a small price difference per kilogram. She responded that selling early would help maintain cash flow and allow them to buy more cement to complete the yard. The exchange was calm but reflected ongoing financial pressure. After preparing enough water and confirming the stove was safely extinguished, Toan bathed first as agreed. Warm water relaxed his stiff muscles. When he finished, electricity had not yet returned. Tu Diem bathed using the flashlight placed outside the door. Toan waited nearby, listening to the steady sound of water to ensure she did not slip on the damp floor. After the morning incident, he did not want another accident. When they returned to the mat, the wind had softened. No further rain came. They discussed plans for the coming days. If the construction job from High materialized, Toan intended to use part of the earnings to reduce a smaller portion of debt first, lowering interest pressure. Paying gradually, even in small amounts, is better than delaying completely. Tu Diem said that if the tomato harvest went well, she wanted to repair the front roof before the next rainy season. Each of them focused on specific, realistic steps. No grand plans, only practical ones. Close to midnight, electricity returned. The yellow bulb suddenly lit the yard again. They looked at each other and exhaled. At least water pumping and phone charging would not be interrupted in the morning. Toan cleaned up the dishes and checked the gate and wood covering one more time. He ensured everything was secured before going inside. They lay down on their simple bed. Outside, insects hummed and a distant truck passed along the highway. Toan stared at the ceiling for several minutes, thinking about the meeting with High, the debt call, and the possible construction work starting next week. The pressure had not disappeared, but there was now a clearer direction than there had been that morning. Tu Diem lay beside him, her breathing gradually steady. Exhaustion carried her to sleep quickly. Toan turned slightly and pulled the blanket higher to block the cool air entering through a small gap. Another small action, done without words. Outside, the newly poured cement path continued drying through the night. If no rain returned, by morning it would be firm enough for light steps. That narrow walkway did not solve every problem they faced. but it proved something practical. When they identified a weakness, they repaired it. When risk appeared, they acted immediately instead of waiting. A thin mist began forming near the edge of the field as the temperature dropped slightly before dawn. The soil still held moisture from the storm, and the scent of wet earth lingered in the air. Inside the house, the steady rhythm of breathing replaced the tension of the day. The farm was quiet, but not fragile. Tools were cleaned and placed in order. The buckets of water stood ready for morning use. Even in uncertainty, preparation created a layer of control. Tomorrow would bring work again, but tonight ended with structure, not chaos.
Sau một đêm mưa lớn, Toàn và Từ Diễm phát hiện sân ngập nước, củi ướt gần hết và nền xi măng bị trũng, khiến nước không thoát. Họ khẩn trương kê lại củi, trồng lại cây đỗ quyên và đổ lại lối đi để tránh lặp lại rủi ro. Trong lúc đó, áp lực tài chính vẫn đè nặng khi Toàn gặp Hải để tìm cơ hội việc làm, xây dựng và nhận thêm cuộc gọi nhắc nợ. Buổi tối, gió mạnh và mất điện khiến họ phải chuẩn bị nước dự phòng, gia cố lại bạt tre và tính toán kế hoạch bán cà chua sớm để xoay tiền mặt. Dù mệt mỏi và thiếu thốn, họ vẫn chăm sóc nhau bằng những hành động cụ thể. Từ chuẩn bị bữa tối đơn giản đến kiểm tra từng chi tiết nhỏ trước khi đi ngủ.